But those are war crimes. Those are war crimes.
So on those things,
and those are war crimes, yes?
Probably, yeah.
And what about in Lebanon?
I think there is a big difference. One is a democracy and an ally of the West.
So if you're an ally of the West, you get to kill kids. I don't care whether you're an ally of the West or an enemy of the West.
Fine.
I care about what you do.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. I'm sure you've all heard about Israel's latest victim, Lebanon, who again the media have painted as an aggressor because they love to report about how Middle Eastern brown people just want nothing but trouble. And of course, they conveniently leave out that Israel has invaded and occupied Lebanon for a few decades now. Lebanon is a half-Muslim, half-Christian country. Thankfully, brother Mehdi Hasan went on Piers Morgan's show to discuss Israel's Patriot explosive attack across Lebanon, as well as their airstrikes over Beirut, and why these are war crimes committed against innocent civilians. Mehdi Hasan is a Zionist dragon slayer. He's defeated human trash like Douglas Murray, and more recently, Elon Levi, amongst others. As a political pundit and a journalist, he does his research, sticks to the facts, and doesn't allow Zionist mouthpieces any wiggle room to get away with their scripted propaganda. And surprise, surprise, Piers Morgan is back on the side of Israel. Piers switches sides so much he could take up a career as a professional wrestler. One minute he's a good guy, next minute he's a bad guy, etc, etc. Let's look at the first clip where Mehdi educates Piers on the history of Israel's occupation of Lebanon.
Do you see a distinction between Hezbollah and, say, Hamas?
I mean, they're very different groups. They operate in different places, in different contexts. I guess what they have in common is that they both came out of Israel's occupation of their land, right? Hamas comes out of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and many people are not aware of the fact that Israel occupied Lebanon, southern Lebanon, for 18 years, from 1982 to 2000 when they withdrew, although the Lebanese argue that there's still an occupation of a piece of Lebanese land called the Sheba Farms. So in that sense, they're similar. They're obviously different in some of their tactics. They're both Muslim, but one is Shia, one is Sunni. We've seen for a year Israel killing thousands of civilians in Gaza and saying, well, Hamas is to blame because of human shields, because of tunnels. That argument just does not work in Lebanon. They've killed 550 people, Piers, on Monday. An insane amount of people in a single day, one of the highest single-day death tolls in modern warfare. Almost all of them civilians, according to the Lebanese health ministry, which is not Hezbollah, by the way. You know, they always say Hamas-controlled health ministry in Gaza. So I think what we've seen is so phenomenally bad on Israel's end and so little defense. You know, October 7th was used, as you and I have discussed before, as the excuse for killing tens of thousands of Palestinians.
Well, I would categorise it differently. I don't think they used it as an excuse to go and kill tens of thousands of Palestinians. They responded to one of the most egregious terror attacks of modern times.
But when does the response end? We're nearly a year in.
Well, that's the question. That is the question.
Well, that's when it becomes an excuse. When you carry on killing and killing.
Is it an excuse, or is it that they are wedded to the elimination of Hamas because Hamas has persistently said, we want to keep doing the same thing over and over again? And there's a correlation with Hezbollah, whose charter is very explicit. They stand for the eradication of Israel. I mean, that's what they're about.
That doesn't justify killing 500 people in a single day, does it?
I didn't say it did, but
okay. That's what bothers me. That's what happened this week. That's the big story. Hezbollah's charter is irrelevant to what we're talking about. That's not why they killed 500 people on Monday, Piers. I mean, Hezbollah's charter's been around for years.
I don't think it's irrelevant that you have a terror group on your doorstep who are wedded to your extinction. Why is that irrelevant?
I think the language you use is loaded, Piers. You say on your doorstep. Do you know they did a poll of Americans a while back who thought that Palestinians were occupying Israel? When we talk about this stuff, we make it sound like Israel is the one being occupied, besieged. Israel's the one that's occupying the West Bank, Gaza, the longest military occupation in the world, going back to 1967. Israel is the country that occupied southern Lebanon. I mean, everything, the world did not begin on October the 7th. 1978, Israel invades southern Lebanon. 1982, Israel invades southern Lebanon. Sabra and Shatila massacre. 2006, Second Lebanon War.
I'm glad that Brother Mehdi was able to give context to why Lebanon responded to Israel and not the other way around. Israel really are greedy, thieving slimeballs. Palestine isn't enough, they want Lebanon too, who they've been occupying since 1982 until the present day, as Mehdi said. He also said the airstrike Israel carried out in Lebanon resulted in one of the highest civilian death tolls in a single day in modern warfare. Israel seems to be breaking all the satanic war crime records as usual, to which Piers replied October 7th was the worst attack in modern times. Times. Now, I do not condone any loss of life on any side, and I don't dismiss it as collateral damage like other human garbage people disguised as human beings do. But like Brother Mehdi said, this did not start on October 7th. And I'd like to correct Piers by revealing what actually is the worst terror attack in modern times, worse than October 7th, and that is the year-long attack on Palestine from then to the present day with no end in sight. I don't think Piers Morgan is on the Zionist payroll. I think he is somewhat ignorant with elements of ingrained bigotry that he's not conscious of, and at the same time he's also sharp enough to know that drama content sells, so he's deliberately provocative to maintain his high viewing figures. But when people's lives are at stake, siding with justice is more important than views and monetary success. Well, at least it should be. And as Mehdi pointed out, it is because of this type of reporting, and let's be honest, the mainstream media is worse than Piers, that people are tricked into thinking Israel is somehow the victim, despite them wiping out civilian populations in Arab nations. Let's look at the next clip where Brother Mehdi debunks Piers' lies about Lebanon firing rockets into Israel on October the 8th.
You always make it sound like they're just doing this for the sake of it. Hezbollah's first response to October the 7th was to unleash rockets on Israel.
That's not true.
On October the 8th.
That's not true. That's not true.
That is what happened.
Where did they fire the first rocket?
They fired rockets on the 8th.
Where?
Well, you tell me.
No, you just said they fired at Israel. Where?
Well, they fired in the direction of Israel.
Where did they hit? They fired at the
if you
Sheba
know the
Farms.
answer, tell me.
I do. They fired at the Sheba Farms, which, as I said earlier, is an area of Syria. Well, the Lebanese claim it's Lebanon. Syria claims it's Lebanon. Israel says no and is occupying the Sheba Farms. They fired at Israeli military installations in the Sheba Farms.
They were firing at an area that Israel says is theirs.
No, Israel doesn't say that. Israel says it's Syria's. Because remember, Piers, Israel is occupying Syria and the West Bank and Gaza, and Lebanon would argue parts of Lebanon. This is the problem, right? The core of the problem is Israel's territorial expansionism.
It's a mess.
Attacks, not a mess. It's Israel occupying multiple Arab lands, which leads to quote-unquote resistance or quote-unquote terrorism, whichever word. I don't care what word you want to use right now. But that is the core. Deal with the occupation, then you deal with the violence. But the reality is 82% of the exchange of fire between Lebanon and Israel since October the 7th has been done by Israel.
Okay.
82%.
But here's
is that not a provocation of
Let
Hezbollah?
me finish my point, which is that since October the 8th, 19,000 missiles, rockets have come from Hezbollah to Israel, right?
But way more from Israel into Lebanon.
Well, I'm sure,
82%.
Of course they've responded. What else are they supposed to do?
82%.
But
this is not two equal sides.
So they can't defend themselves.
But the vast majority of attacks is on Lebanon.
Okay, but would you condemn the firing of rockets by Hezbollah or not?
Of course, I condemn all attacks on civilian targets. It is undeniable that the root cause of the violence is Israel, Israel's occupation, the genocide in Gaza. What did the leader of Hezbollah say? He said, we won't fire any rockets if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the president of Iran say? We won't retaliate for what you did to Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the Houthis say? We'll stop blocking ships if you end the killing in Gaza. Where do all roads lead back to? Call their bluff, stop the Gaza fighting, and then see what happens.
Piers was so sure about Lebanon supposedly firing rockets into Israel on October 8th until Mehdi Hasan schooled him on the facts. This is what I mean about ignorance and how dangerous it is on a platform like Piers Morgan's. He did not even know that the rockets fired by Lebanon on that date were on territory in Lebanon being occupied by Israel, and the rest of the mainstream media report the same misinformation as Piers. I'm not going to lie, it was hilarious to see Piers squirm under pressure as Mehdi called him out on not knowing the location of where the rockets were fired. Mehdi also quite rightly pointed out that Israel is not only occupying Palestine and Lebanon, they're also occupying parts of Syria, and that is the crux of the problem. Israel's occupation of land that is not theirs. All these issues would not exist if Israel stopped stealing land and occupying territories that belong to other nations. And then they cry victim when people resist being robbed and dance around the issue that they are to blame in the first place by deflecting the blame onto the people they are oppressing. Mehdi also made the point that stats show Israel is the main aggressor in the exchange of fire between Israel and Lebanon since October 7th, with Israel doing 82% of the attacks. You hear Zionist mouthpieces say if such and such would surrender, Israel would stop. That's simply not true, because like Mehdi stated, every militant group has told Israel they will halt if Israel stops the violence against Palestine. Let's watch the next clip where Mehdi schools Piers on the violence Israel committed weeks before October 7th.
Yeah, but Israel has called Hamas's bluff.
When?
There was a ceasefire in place before October the 7th.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
It's fundamentally false. They were attacking Palestinians the week before October the 7th.
There was...
In September, you can Google it on that tablet. What's your definition of a ceasefire?
Well,
Israel gets to attack people and not the other way around.
Okay.
In September, hold on. In September, you just made a charge that's not true. There's a tablet there. You can Google it. Guardian headline right there. You can go see the news report.
I don't Google during interviews.
Well, afterwards, everyone can. There's a Guardian headline, September 2023, a month before October the 7th. The headline is Palestinians shot in the ankles by Israel in Gaza, attacked. There were airstrikes in Gaza. And by the way, Gaza is not isolated. Gaza and the West Bank under international law are one entity. There were several hundred Palestinians killed in the West Bank before October.
But my point to you, Mehdi, is
so there was no ceasefire. You just can't say it's just not true. 500 people were killed on Monday. 100 women, 50 children. I assume you condemn that and don't support the killing of civilians in Lebanon, right? 500 people died. That's the equivalent of 30,000 Americans or 6,000 Brits in a day.
Let me come back to the week before, where 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists were targeted specifically.
How do you know that?
What do you mean? How do I know that?
You just said 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists were targeted.
How many was it?
I don't know. I'm asking you. You made the claim. How
That
do you
is
know
what's been reported.
By
Do you
who?
dispute that?
Yeah, I dispute everything Israel says.
you
They
don't know
lied
the
for
real
a year.
number.
I just saw a little girl's funeral last week. Was she a Hezbollah terrorist in your view?
No.
So then why did you say 3,000 terrorists? There was a kid killed.
I was about to say that in the process of targeting very specifically, in an extraordinarily whichever way you
In a
look at
terror
it.
attack.
So they target 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists with their pagers, walkie-talkies and so on. In the process, a small number of civilians get killed, which is obviously deplorable. But if it is right, as has been widely reported by all mainstream media, that 3,000 terrorists...
People associated with Hezbollah. Not everybody in Hezbollah is a terrorist.
Okay. But, okay.
Like a driver, a nurse.
3,000 members of Hezbollah were targeted, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that that is... Some people have claimed it's unlawful.
Yep.
You've said it's a terror attack, so you think it was illegal.
Yep.
But I would say that's not. I mean, I would say that if you look at that in totality, they are responding to rocket attacks all year, and they are being extremely precise, unlike what they've been doing in Gaza, where I do not accept that Israel has been doing this precision targeting they keep talking about, and I've held them to account for that. I do think in this particular occasion, they were extremely precise, and it was a brilliant piece of warfare.
Again, Mehdi came with the facts. There was no ceasefire before October 7th, 2023, because a ceasefire consists of all parties involved ceasing to fire. And as the brother pointed out, the IDF were carrying out ground and air strikes in Gaza and the West Bank in September 2023. So Israel's definition of a ceasefire is others should cease firing at them while they continue to fire at will. There's that Zionist supremacy again rearing its ugly head. It is scary how convinced Piers is about the misinformation he puts out. This is very irresponsible. At least Brother Mehdi educated him. So from this point onwards, Piers has no excuse to repeat that nonsense in the future. At the very least, Piers condemned Israel for eliminating 550 Lebanese civilians in one single day. Don't you think it's crazy how Piers Morgan thinks that secretly planting explosives in pagers and walkie-talkies and shipping them to Lebanon via other nations under the disguise of fair trade and then detonating them in public places is somehow a strategic military tactic rather than an act of extremism? Think about it. If a military that was Muslim had done the same thing, do you think Piers and others would call it anything but an extremist act? So once again, this is a complete double standard that exposes the ingrained unconscious bigotry of Piers Morgan and people who think like him. Let's check out the next clip where Piers harps on about Israel's self-defense slogan.
Some parts of this, you have to say, Israel's entitled to defend itself.
So actually, Lebanon is the one that needs to defend itself, as we say, 500 people killed on a day. Number one, you said just a moment ago, when they eventually respond, you use that phrase eventually. That's just factually inaccurate. We already discussed.
No, you talked about
82% of the attacks, they have been bombing Lebanon for a year. 5 days after October the 7th, or 6 days after, they killed a Reuters video journalist in southern Lebanon. According to the UN, a war crime, right? So they have been killing people in Lebanon who have nothing to do with Hezbollah for a year now. So let's not say eventually. Number two, I would say, yes, it's an act of terror. And that's just not my view. You know Leon Panetta, former Obama defense secretary, former head of the CIA. When the former head of the CIA comes out and says Israel is committing an act of terror, I think we should take that seriously. But it's not just him. A group of UN special rapporteurs on human rights and extrajudicial killings put out a statement
But
on
not
you.
think that action was justified?
No, of course not. I don't think you should booby-trap devices. It's against international law to use booby traps. I think I'm actually petrified, separate to the politics of the Middle East, Piers. I'm actually petrified at the ability of governments to use technology and surveillance to track us and now kill us. I think there's a wider discussion to be had. I think the idea that Israel keeps opening the doors to all sorts of new precedents that other governments will run with and we will regret. I think, going into the supply chain of devices, phones, beepers, whatever, pagers, I think that's very, very worrying. I also think from a practical point of view, it's not targeted. If you blow up a guy with a pager, even if you think he's a terrorist or a terrorist leader, you don't know if he's driving, he's at an intersection, he's about to crash his car into children crossing the road. We saw them going off in grocery stores. It's taken out people's eyes, fingers. No, I don't think it's targeted. I think it's barbaric. I think it's illegal. And I also think, look, I say this all the time, Even if I was an Israeli, I would not support this. It doesn't make Israel safer.
Is there any military response that Israel can give? First, to what Hamas did on October the 7th, and second, to what Hezbollah has been doing ever since. Is there any military response Israel can do which, in your eyes, would be justified?
Well, I don't accept the loaded question. You say response. Israel is the aggressor in all of these places. As I say,
they are illegally... the aggressor on October the 7th, was it?
Well, it was actually, because it was occupying Gaza and it was besieging Gaza for 20 years. I'm questioning you use the word response. Response implies everything starts on October 7th.
No, I
don't accept your timeline.
I've never said that.
Well, you keep saying response.
If in England somebody suddenly launched an attack on our people and they killed 1,200 and wounded nearly 7,000, I would absolutely expect my government to respond with substantial force. Would you?
Yes, but Britain...
So you would?
Hold on. But is Britain occupying territory in that scenario? Because that's the key point here. They are occupied or they're not occupied.
I think they probably are, yeah.
Not probably. The ICJ says they're occupied. Yeah. Shlomo Brom, who's one of the former top Israeli generals, one of their big strategists, said after October the 7th, what did you expect if you keep people under military occupation?
Is that what you think?
They will rise up. Yeah, of course.
As you saw, Mehdi spoke about how the UN and the former director of the CIA in America both said that implanting explosives under false pretenses and communication devices is an act of extremism committed by Israel because it is in direct violation of international law. And as Brother Mehdi said, we should all be worried because not only can governments or even scarier Israel spy on us via our devices, if they wanted to, they could also eliminate us and our families. That is horrifying. Respect to Brother Mehdi, he did not give Piers any wiggle room to use loaded language to paint the Israeli government as a so-called victim with the fake moral high ground of responding to attacks. He called them what they are, irresponsible aggressors that are putting foreign civilians and even their own people in danger by oppressing other nations mercilessly for decades on end. And he brilliantly swatted aside Piers's hypothetical question, if the UK was attacked, how would we respond? To which Mehdi replied, it depends on if we were illegally occupying others or not. And again, that's what it comes down to. If Israel did not occupy these nations, there would be no conflict. The occupation of land by force is the cause of all of this. Let's look at the next clip where Piers doubles down on how detonating devices in public is somehow morally okay.
You literally just said you can target combat.
Yes.
But when they did that last week with the walkie-talkies and pages, you said, no, that's a terror attack, it's illegal.
Hold on.
Couldn't there been a more precise targeting of combatants?
Because A, they didn't just target combatants, as we've just discussed. B,
very
they did it in
small
civilian
number of
areas.
civilians
And C, they did it in violation of the amended Protocol 2 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which doesn't allow booby-traps.
So there is no...
I already explained the booby-traps.
Actually, no, that's not true. It's not true.
Okay.
Booby-traps are not allowed if they are genuinely indiscriminate in the way that they potentially...
You don't think going off in a grocery store is indiscriminate?
No, actually, I believe what I've seen...
You gave the British example earlier, Piers. Are you okay with someone blowing you up in Sainsbury's, the guy next to you, blowing you up in the aisle of Sainsbury's?
I believe that what has been reported, right, widely reported, is that 3,000 terrorist militants, Hezbollah members, whatever you want to call them, were very precisely targeted.
Are you saying people did...
By your criteria...
Did they go off in grocery stores and hospitals?
If it's legal...
Piers, did they go off in grocery stores and hospitals? No, you brought up the UK earlier. We're in London right now. If I go from here to the local Sainsbury's to pick up some chocolate on the way out of the studio, and a terrorist is targeted next to me and they blow it up in Sainsbury's and I lose my eyes, you're saying that's okay?
No, but if you have
Sounds
people...
like you're saying it's okay.
If those people in that grocery store are literally responsible for firing rocket after rocket at
You're okay with them being blown up with me? I'm saying even if it's legitimate, which in this case it's not legitimate, let's say I take the saying it's legitimate, you still shouldn't do it because all it leads to is escalation. I don't want escalation in the Middle East. I don't want a regional war that America dragged into. The military solution to everything is a failure, whether you think it's moral or immoral.
How should Israel respond?
I've told you, end the occupation. You don't want to talk about the occupation, Piers. I'm telling you, that's the root cause. Israel wants to do everything except what every smart person is telling them to do. Even members of their own security establishment are telling them to do. End the occupation.
You say, Mehdi, all roads lead to the occupation.
Yes.
Okay? Israel would say all roads lead to Iran.
Who cares what Israel says? They've lied for the last year.
Who cares what they say?
Yeah, do you care what Russia says?
No.
This is what I'm saying. You're inconsistent. The occupier and the invader doesn't... I don't care
it's not a barbaric
So if you're a liberal democracy... First of all, they're not a liberal democracy. And second of all...
Well, they are.
No, they're not. They're an ethnocracy. But even if they were a liberal democracy, you don't get to invade other people's land. That's not an excuse Piers, you sound like you're justifying an illegal military occupation here.
The dehumanization of people in the Arab world is mind-blowing. This is not a video game. These are real people. I do not know how anyone can say that committing acts of violence in stores and hospitals against civilians is okay. I like how Mehdi made it somewhat real for Piers when he said, how would you feel if those devices exploded in a British supermarket? Piers tried to fumble his way into justifying it, but in reality, any decent human being knows there's no excusing this. Brother Mehdi quite rightly stated that Israel is not a democracy, and that they are an ethnocracy, meaning their political power is distributed according to ethnic or racial affiliation. Anyone else smell Zionist supremacy in the air? As the brother said once again, Israel's illegal occupation is why this is all happening, and until that is addressed, there will never be peace. Britain or America or any other Western country would not accept anyone doing to them what Israel is doing to Palestine, Lebanon and Syria, so why should anyone else accept it? The solution is for Israel to sit down with the UN and NATO and the Arab Gulf nations and make a plan to stop the occupation and return what they have stolen in order to make peace. But that will never happen because Israel have ambitions to expand even more through the same means they have always used, and that is through violence and oppression. And because of this harrowing reality, the West need to dissociate themselves from Israel by not arming them and funding them, which again won't happen because the Zionist claws are firmly wedged into the power structures of the West, from media to politics to banking to entertainment. Let's take a look at the next clip.
You don't think that's what Hamas did in October?
I thought we were talking about Hezbollah. You're jumping around.
I'm talking about both.
You were talking about Hezbollah a moment ago.
It's the same. To me, it's the same.
But that's the problem. To you, it's the same. Everything's very simplistic.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why. You have two.
Lebanon is way more complicated.
To me, you have two groups of terrorists funded by Iran. They both are wedded to the existential removal and disintegration of all things Israel, and they're prepared to use a lot of violence to achieve that.
But not as much violence as Israel has used to occupy their land for 50 years in the case of Gaza and the West Bank.
So your argument is whatever Hamas has done and whatever Hezbollah does is justified.
No. The only person justifying violence here is you, Piers, not me. So I've not justified any violence today. You've justified terrorist attacks via pages. You seem to have justified the occupation. You won't even say occupation.
I do think the specific targeting of Hezbollah in the way that they did it...
Do you think it makes Israel safer?
That's a different question.
Well, that's the question that matters to me.
I think Israel feels...
There's no point doing all this, and at the end of the day, the war continues. I want to end the conflict, Piers.
So, of course, maybe this is...
Well, then escalations don't help. Israel is briefing the press, Piers.
Just saying, I want it all. I want peace and joy. You sound like Kamala Harris.
No, actually, Kamala Harris is funding Israel. She supports you, so that's the problem.
She doesn't support me.
She supports your position that Israel has a right to do this stuff. It doesn't have a right to do this stuff.
They have a right to do all of it. I've never said that.
Oh, you pick and choose which bits?
Yeah.
What do you think they have a right to do?
I think that they have been disproportionate in their response
to Gaza. That's very vague. What do you think they're allowed to do in Gaza? You made me very specific. What do you think they should specifically do in Gaza?
I think in Gaza that they were the victims on October the 7th.
You've already said that.
I know.
What should they do in Gaza?
So I think they are perfectly entitled to go after Hamas. What they're not entitled to do, in my estimation, is to level the whole of Gaza to the ground in the way they've been doing. Nor can they move vast numbers of Palestinian civilians to specific areas.
Those are war crimes.
And then bomb those areas as well.
And those are war crimes,
So on those things,
and those are war crimes, yes?
Probably, yeah.
And what about in Lebanon?
In Lebanon...
They just killed 500 people.
There is, to me, a big difference.
50 children.
I'm about to answer you. I think there is a big difference between what they did in the targeting of the pages and what they did with the airstrikes, which were far more indiscriminate and killed far more civilians. I mean, and my question for Netanyahu, if he would dare to do an interview with me, which he now won't, but if he did, I would say, what are you trying to achieve here? Because it seems to me you're just levelling Gaza, killing tens of thousands of people in the process.
Trying to stay in office.
You're never going to finish off Hamas completely. You're certainly not doing anything but, in my view, fueling their ideology. And you have no plan for what happens in Gaza afterwards.
Agreed.
And you have a bunch of right-wing nut jobs in your
We finally agree.
Who actually do speak in quite a genocidal way. All of that I agree with.
They are about Lebanon too, by the way. You know that, right? They're speaking about Lebanon in a genocidal way too.
I think there are people there who just want total war with everything to do with Palestinians.
But don't you think someone like you with your huge platform should be calling that out consistently?
I do, but I also think...
you just gave me a whole thing. Iran backs Hamas, Hezbollah, terrorism. That just sounds like an Israeli narrative.
Again, Mehdi was spot on. There's no justification for violence on any side. But the fact remains that 1,000,001 excuses are made to justify Israel's violence, by the mainstream media, by Western governments, and by Zionist propagandists, despite Israel being the main aggressor above everyone else involved. Mehdi Hasan was right to call Piers Morgan out on this, and he was right to tell Piers that he has a responsibility to change this narrative on his massive platform in order to not be part of the problem. Why is it when Israel or any non-Muslim nation engages in actual extremism, it is excused by wrapping it up in heroic words? But when a Muslim nation does something similar on a much smaller scale, it is automatically tarred with the labels of extremism. Again, this is that ingrained discrimination that I spoke about. Well done to Mehdi for pressing Piers Morgan on whether Israel is committing war crimes in Palestine, to which Piers conceded with the words, probably yes. This was one of the only W's for Piers in this whole segment. That and the fact that he called Netanyahu and his whole cabinet a bunch of far-right genocidal nutcases. Let's watch the last clip where Mehdi completely owns Piers and exposes his moral blind spots, political inconsistencies, and double standards.
When we talk about Russia, Ukraine, you don't do both sides. You blame Russia as the invader and occupier. You don't do that with Israel. That is the double standard on your part.
No,
I try and be consistent, Piers. I'm morally consistent. I say Russia, hold on, let me finish the sentence. Russia illegally invaded and occupied Israel and illegally annexed to Crimea. And Israel is doing the same thing in the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights.
As you know, they are completely different.
Yeah, Israel's worse. It's been going on much longer. And people living under much worse conditions.
And
they've killed more kids.
There is no similarity in these two situations.
Agreed. Israel's is worse.
It's not.
How many kids have been killed in Ukraine versus Gaza?
Well, in 1 year.
Ever.
In 1 year?
Ever. Take whatever point you want. More kids have been killed in Gaza than in Ukraine.
Okay.
Every human rights group agrees with that.
What's happened in Ukraine? We can come to Ukraine. What happened in Ukraine is a Russian dictator invaded illegally.
We agree on Ukraine.
Yeah.
But we don't agree on Israel because you're not consistent.
I think Israel is much more complicated.
That's complicated, as my friend Ta-Nehisi Coates pointed out the other way, is just a good way of avoiding attributing moral responsibility. It's complicated. No, it's not complicated, actually. Israel is the occupier under international law. Israel is the one killing the vast majority of civilians. Right now, it's not a liberal democracy. It's run by neo-fascists now.
Well, I don't disagree with you. There are some right-wing headbangers on that cabinet. I also think that Netanyahu has to go. I also think the whole of Hamas have to go, right?
Under no scenario is it a liberal democracy right now. Palestinians do not have the same rights.
You take one side completely.
Just like you do in Ukraine.
No, yes.
Yeah. So I'm consistent. I take the side of the Ukrainian people under occupation and the Palestinian people under occupation. I'm consistent.
No, you're not. They're totally different situations.
You have to say that because you're not consistent.
And you have to say what you say.
No, but I literally described it. 2 people's under foreign occupation, 2 people's having their hospitals bombed, 2 people's having their kids killed, 2 people facing governments that say genocidal stuff. Yeah, I'm consistent.
One is a democracy and an ally of the West. And one is not.
Oh, ally of the West. What little slip in there. What's that got to do with anything? So allies of the West get to be genocidal?
No.
Why did you say ally of the West? Why is that relevant?
I don't believe what they're doing in
So if Russia was an ally of the West, they could kill people in Ukraine?
I don't believe what they're doing in Gaza is genocide. You do, I don't. Well, genocide is the complete...
Put genocide to one side. Whether we agree or not on genocide, and it is genocidal.
It's not genocide.
You just said they're your ally of the West. Why is that relevant?
I think it's important that you support...
So if you're an ally of the West, you get to kill kids?
No. You get
support. So why is it relevant?
You support...
You're making my point for me, Piers. I'm consistent. I don't care whether you're an ally of the West or an enemy of the West.
Fine.
I care about what you do.
Yes.
And Russia and Israel both committing war crimes, both saying genocidal stuff.
But Mehdi, here's my point. You are so blindly anti-Israel that you frame everything...
I could say the same thing to you about Russia.
I'm very blindly against Russia.
Okay, then so again, so you're inconsistent. I'm consistent. I'm blindly anti-occupying Russia that occupies Ukraine, and I'm blindly anti an Israel that occupies Gaza.
What a great point. Why do people like Piers Morgan demonize Russia for what they are doing to Ukraine, yet make excuses for Israel doing the same thing to Palestine and now Lebanon? Piers tried to worm his way out of it by saying it's not the same thing, to which Mehdi replied, yes, Israel is much worse. It's crazy how Piers tried to deny that what Israel is doing is worse than what Russia is doing. Mehdi's simple question about how many kids have lost their lives in Ukraine compared to Palestine unravelled Piers' denial and left Morgan dumbfounded. Mehdi completely obliterated Piers Morgan for his colonial mindset Freudian slip when he called Israel an ally of the West, as if that gives them impunity to commit atrocities at will. Brother Mehdi summed it up brilliantly when he said it shouldn't matter if you're an ally of the West or not. No one should be able to commit war crimes without consequence. I'll tell you why Piers isn't consistent when it comes to Ukrainians and Palestinians Palestinians. Again, it's unconscious. One group has darker skin and a different religion. I'm not saying he's racist, but there are elements of this type of ingrained ignorance in a lot of people that is centuries old. This interview was a complete own by Mehdi Hasan. He debunked every piece of ignorance and propaganda Piers Morgan has ever come up with. Hopefully Piers uses this re-education to correct future guests on his show. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.